biodiversity erosion and the crisis brought forth by the pandemic. As the idea of the blue economy and ocean governance have come to dominate the economic and security agendas of nations in the Indo Pacific, how can they cooperate to promote national and regional prosperity? More specifically, for today's session, how can India and France cooperate on the blue economy through a balanced approach that sustains the oceans and its resources while developing the ocean economy? We have a full house to discuss these questions, and I'd like to take a few minutes to introduce our excellent panel of speakers today. Mr. Carl Bernardac is Deputy Head at the Research Department of the French Development Agency. He will be sharing opening remarks with us, after which we will be moving to a panel discussion of about 45 minutes, where we will be joined by Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, who is Distinguished Fellow in Foreign Policy Studies Program at Gateway House, Swati Ganeshan, who is Honorary Adjunct Fellow at National Maritime Foundation, where she looks at the blue economy and sustainable development, and Premesha Saha, who is Associate Fellow with the Strategic Studies Program at ORF, where she looks at the Eastern Indian Ocean. My name is Sunaina, and I am Senior Fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. We will be hearing from our panel shortly. For now, let's turn to Mr. Bernardac. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Dear colleague, it's a privilege to open this conference on the blue economy today, the blue economic cooperation in Indo-Pacific. Before presenting what type of cooperation AFD can deploy, I would like to sincerely thank ORF for organizing this conference and giving us a chance to exchange and deepen our partnership. Indeed, AFD is deeply committed to engage with high-level research organization, and we are delighted to partner with ORF to leverage knowledge with a view to inform public and international discourse around the development agenda. First of all, I would like to dig a little bit into what AFD is aiming at contributing to the French strategy on the Indo-Pacific region. France's views on Indo-Pacific is to promote a more inclusive political space, and aim at reaching three objectives. First, security for all its inhabitants. Second, preserving public goods, be them local or global public goods. And then strengthen the partnership with a value-added partnership with France and Europe. AFD can contribute to this agenda by widening the partnerships and deploying technical, financial, and knowledge-based cooperation to foster sectoral transition in order to build a more resilient and more socially inclusive economies and, in the end, society. Now, what does blue economy means for AFD? AFD has acknowledged the importance of protecting the ocean and marine resources, both for, I would say, environmental, social, and economic purposes. AFD Ocean strategies has three objectives. First, to improve the governance of marine and coastal areas and resources. Second, to promote a competitive, sustainable, and inclusive marine sectors. Third and last, to conserve coastal and marine ecosystems and manage anthropogenic pressures. To illustrate that, just to mention that AFD has already committed over 5 billion euros to ocean activities globally between 2008 and 2019, including 700 million in 2019 alone. For us, it's very aligned to the Sustainable Development Goal and the 2030 agenda. I would like to emphasize the challenge of achieving some cross-cutting goals, such as biodiversity, climate change, and inequalities that are probably the goals that are far behind. And in the Indo-Pacific, blue economy has indeed been identified as a key sector by AFD to contribute to this geopolitical construct through a development approach, as I mentioned before. And for us, this developmental approach or component is very complementary to the security and strategic one. It does illustrate quite well what we call a 3D approach. 3D meaning bringing together development, defense, and development. And joining our specific expertise, we aim to make Indo-Pacific a safer, more prosperous, and more inclusive space. Aside from, I mentioned, a few minutes ago, the type of cooperation, technical, bringing expertise in certain areas, be it marine resources, coastal protection, to be more resilient to climate change impact, and so forth. AFD provides, as a development finance institution, financing to infrastructure and investment that have contributed to these goals, and also financing of public policies. And third aspect is the role we can play in knowledge construction and knowledge sharing in the sector. For instance, the link between a sustainable marine resource protection and the analysis of the value chain in order to generate resources for local communities and local economies. We are aware that many players have to come together to overcome the challenges arising for climate change, inequalities reduction, and the anthropic pressures on resources. We at the Knowledge, Research and Innovation direction, we are launching different programs together with the South Asia AFD office, regional office, to explore operational potential and to engage in local policy dialogue. Indeed, for us, not only the research, evaluation and capitalization activities that we implement ensure and retract into the technical and financial cooperation that we implement, but it's also for us a precious means to contribute in partnership with local institutions and local research centers to the public policy dialogue. This conference is on blue economy, indeed, as I mentioned, a crucial sector, as I have stressed, but AFD is also exploring other ways to address Indo-Pacific from a developmental perspective, with the goal of promoting public goods. And we are quite well equipped to initiate with our partner in India and in the region dialogues around climate, energy, green finance challenges, for example. And we are delighted to build a fruitful and mutually constructive partnership with ORF to foster those issues. Thanks again to ORF for organizing this seminar, and to the speaker and distinguished panelists that will intervene, and we look forward to further collaborate together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bernardac. You've actually given us a lot to think about and talk about. I'd like to bring in the rest of our speakers now. If I can request each of you to offer quick thoughts to set us up for this discussion, if we can start with Ambassador Bhatia, and then Swati and Premesha.
Thank you, Sunaina. Thank you, ORF, for including me in this panel. It's a privilege to connect with our scholars and also our friend from France. I think in the next 3 minutes or so, essentially partly reacting to what we have just heard and partly putting across our own perspective, I think we can begin by saying that we in India today, after collective work for the past 5 years, are quite well placed in terms of having generated a very rich body of work, knowledge work on blue economy. I think the level of consciousness about the potential, the contours, the challenges, the opportunities and obstacles to fully harnessing blue economy are quite clear, and they are widespread. We also agree to the idea that when it comes to oceans in the Indo-Pacific, there is a strong imbalance. We talk too much and reflect too much on maritime security and much less on the economic aspects of development, that is blue economy. Therefore, there is a need to correct that balance, and perhaps that can be done with some of the most advanced economies in the world, starting with the European Union and France in particular. So in that light, the issue is, what is the way forward for us in terms of working and collaborating with AFD, a legendary historic institution established by General Charles de Gaulle back in 1941. I would say the way forward has two aspects. One which relates to India, and the other which relates to the rest of the Indo-Pacific. Now, with regard to India, which enjoys a central position in the Indo-Pacific region, I think firstly it's very important for us to go beyond governments and think tanks and reach out to business enterprises directly. I think it is important to establish direct links with the business chambers, not merely at the national level, but also at the regional level in coastal India, in the states where shores are actually washed by the oceans. Secondly, there has to be a specific focus on certain sectors of blue economy, and my short list would include very much fisheries and aquaculture, shipping, tourism, offshore renewable energy, and marine education and research. I think this is very important. And my third point with regard to India is that we have nothing but great admiration for the French model of French maritime clusters, or CMF. This is an innovative model around the world where all stakeholders in this domain are assembled together, and through the synergy created, full potential of blue economy is being harnessed. I think this is the time for India, for producing in India a version or an edition which is modified and suits India's needs of CMF. Finally, with regard to the aspect beyond India, I think there is a strong convergence of interest between India and France. We should look at all the three sub-regions of the Indo-Pacific, namely the Indian Ocean, the ASEAN region, and the South Pacific region, pick up a certain number of countries and certain sectors, and work, India and France, on a kind of a trilateral cooperation. My list would include countries such as Madagascar, Mauritius, Malaysia, Cambodia, and Pacific Island states. And as I said, the sectors can be sectors where India has a strength and France has the ability to help through knowledge, financing, and best practices. Thank you very much, Sunaina.
Thank you, Swati.
Hi, thank you so much to ORF, AFC for having me here. It's quite an honor to actually be amongst all of you. It was actually a pleasure to listen to Mr. Bernardac as well as usual, Ambassador Bhatia very crisply put together, quite succinctly how India and France could come together. Just to add to some of the points that are made, I will just quickly only talk about a couple of things. I think when it comes to blue economy, we do have these main three pillars that India has been focusing on in its working group reports, also in its draft policy now, which is due to be out. I think it has already gone through a couple of revisions. Is the fact to focus not just on economy, not just on security, but also on sustainable development issues, including environment and climate change. And the biodiversity is a key as well. And I think these are some 3 to 4 key areas where India and France can really come together and play a very, very critical role. And also the fact is that France has already taken quite big steps towards building a very strong, focus on oceans with the ministry on oceans, minister on oceans, and I think the focus has actually also not just moved towards strategic issues, but also towards civilian issues, including shipping, fishing, and I think the current blue economy strategy that India is looking at is very, very much in consonance to what France is also looking at. So I think there are certain very strong synergies that we can actually look at. Also, I think a couple of places where I think India and France can really build partnership would be in science and technological collaboration, specifically in context to oceans, as well as capacity building and upskilling. Upskilling in traditional sectors and capacity building in the emerging sector would be something that would really change the tune for blue economy as a whole, not just in India, but also in Indo-Pacific. I think now that Indo-Pacific is a zone that has not just India, but also several other countries from across the globe who have a significant presence in the region. The fact that it actually provides a very good benchmark and a bedrock system for one to actually look at those many commitments that we have actually made at this particular just finished COP26. And oceans has been a very, very critical aspect in that particular area. And that could be one milestone, a stepping stone for all the countries who are trying to engage strategically in Indo-Pacific and take it forward in a much more nuanced way. While obviously you have geopolitical repercussions, but I think COP26 and every COP has actually taught us that you can go beyond the geopolitics and actually work together to create very, very good synergies and work towards a very strong Indo-Pacific level regional or a sub-regional, supranational regional framework that can really work for us and that can really help us to achieve all goals that we are trying to set, which includes in net zero goals now. I think I would probably focus on the climate change, sustainability, and environment issues. However, from a foreign policy point of view as well, I think now because there is quite a strong voice, not just from governments, but from our different stakeholders, to take a lot of interest and a lot of steps, a lot of actions towards climate change, because it has come a very, very critical point for us to work on. And I think Indo-Pacific provides you that platform wherein countries are engaging with each other at very different levels and from very different economic statures, but are still coming together to work. And I think this is a very good opportunity to actually take it forward and maybe set out some very good actionable points that take us miles ahead and helps the ocean become much more healthier and actually an ocean that actually provides and reaps benefits for everyone, economically, socially, and environmentally. Thank you.
Thanks, Swati. Premesha?
Thank you, Sunaina. Thanks, Mr. Ek, for a very comprehensive presentation and letting us know about France's Indo-Pacific strategy and also how it is prioritizing its blue economy agenda as well. I think when we talk about blue economy, the dilemma which governments and countries usually face is how to balance economic growth and conservation. I think that dilemma is something which, when it comes to marine governance, ocean governance, this is a dilemma which countries and in general, all the Indo-Pacific countries, all the littoral countries have to basically master. Because we've seen in the past, for example, in 2016, when Maldives was trying to boost its tourism, It was developing hotels. It was reclaiming hotels in their coral atoll islands and stuff, and what kind of damage that created. And they had to rethink their policy again. So I think this dilemma still exists when it comes to ocean governance and when it comes to maintaining that balance between blue economic conservation and economic growth on the other hand. But I would like to stress some very good points which have been raised by my co-panelists as well as to the synergies that exist between India and France's blue economic strategy. But a lot has been said about France. So I would like to stress a bit on India's strategies, and I think that would help our French stakeholders to understand what kind of steps that India is taking and where France can also work with us in that domain. I think the two most important strategies or policies which India has in place with regards to the Indo-Pacific, and that can broaden into taking into consideration blue economy also. One was Sagar, which was security and growth for all in the region. That was essentially supposed to be a comprehensive strategy which looks at many things, but then it ended up on just championing connectivity, port development, giving more stress to that, and probably issues like sustainable use of marine resources took a secondary seat, took a back seat in that. But now we have the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, which has 7 pillars, and marine sustainable use of marine resources, blue economy is one of the predominant pillars in that. And through the IPOI, we are looking at collaborating with countries of the Indo-Pacific region, like-minded countries, maritime democracies, to work with us in this initiative, which India broadly terms as its own Indo-Pacific policy, basically. And I think in that countries like France and also Southeast Asian, and as Ambassador Bhatia rightly mentioned, Pacific Island countries have to be brought in, especially in the blue economy chamber. Because my previous speaker spoke about COP26, and when we think about COP26, I think one of the most touching speeches was given by the Tuvalu foreign minister when he was talking about the sea level rise and that we are sinking. So I think environmental security also needs to be looked at when we talk about blue economy. We can term it as, say, climate-induced maritime challenges which the countries are facing. It's sea level rise, it's reduction of fishing stocks, it's affecting fishing stocks, it's affecting our food security also. So I think overfishing, marine pollution, these are issues which needs to be tackled in our ocean governance laws which comes about. I think a platform which is already existing for India and France to cooperate in is IORA, the Indian Ocean Rim Association, for example. It has 6 priority clusters. I think it's time that blue economy is also included as one of them. And countries like India and France is now a member state since December 2020. So it is time for countries like France, India to push for this and also bring in other countries of the Indo-Pacific, for example, Australia, which considers South Pacific as its backyard. For instance, bring these countries which are also working on blue economy, which can provide the financial which can give you financial support and also the technological know-how on how to deal with these issues in the first place. For instance, country like Indonesia in Southeast Asia has done a way lot to deal with blue economy. For instance, one challenge which was not mentioned before is that which sort of increased during the pandemic times was the dumping of marine plastic debris. I think marine plastic is also, which causes marine pollution, is something which has become a grave concern for countries in general. And I think many of the Indian Ocean littorals, especially countries like Indonesia, has been harping on this for a long time. So I think having forums, having discussions, forming working groups within IORA of countries which face these issues on a bigger scale, coming together, forming bodies, working groups to deal with issues like dumping of marine plastic debris, marine pollution, overfishing, for instance, because we are seeing that, for instance, in Southeast Asia, there is now just 64% of the fishing resources which are reportedly in the medium to high risk of overfishing. So there are very little fishing stocks left. So thinking of practices which coming up with laws, good practices which takes care of these issues are also very important. And at the same time, coming up with practices also which generate jobs is another thing which needs to be considered when we frame blue economic strategies or blue economic laws. So I think these are the things which need to be taken care of, and I would be happy to address more issues during the Q&A. Thank you, Sunaina.
Thank you, Premesha. We've actually covered a lot of ground already in this discussion. very concrete suggestions and ideas from Ambassador Bhatia, from Swati on ways that India and France can collaborate, from Premesha on India's approach to blue economy, the limitations of it as well. I'd like to turn to Mr. Bernardac now. Through what everyone was saying, the one sort of common topic that of course comes up, and it has to, we've also just finished with COP26, is the question of climate change. So what opportunities does the blue economy offer for climate change adaptation and mitigation? And within that, and the role that India and France could with partner countries.
Thank you, Sunaina, for the question. And I would like to react on that. It's very important because we sometimes tend to think about the dilemma between, I would say, climate change or environmental preservation and economic growth. I think we have to think a bit differently, and I guess your question is heading to that. What we meant into the cooperation in the blue economy is to have a more resilient blue economy approach, and in two aspects. First, indeed, if there is a depletion of resources, there's no the added value will be gone as well for the local economies and communities. And beyond that, what we can work on the, when I mean more resilient blue economy, is how to assess better how climate change is going to affect, for instance, where the marine resources are located or they are developing, how do they adapt to the impact of climate change, and then to assess how to better protect them in a way that we want to promote local and shared added value of sustainable exploitation of the resource. That will have to take into account, again, the impact of climate change and about the localization, for instance, of the resource. On the other hand, the climate change in the Indo-Pacific cooperation has a lot to do with coastal protection. What does it mean for urban settlement exposed to coastal erosion, sea level rises, and so forth? So this is more tackling with, I would say, building more resilience, livelihood, and settling around the coastal areas. But by that, I would like to really stress the idea of we need to reconcile the so-called dilemma between environmental challenges and growth and jobs promotion. The dilemma is really to design together a economic growth pathway that will be resilient to the impact of climate change, and at the same way promote economic activities that doesn't worsen, I would say, either the fragility of the ecosystem on which livelihood and domestic added value depends on, and also our resilience, more resilience to climate change, if I can summarize in a nutshell. And this is where research, applied research in partnership with Indian institutes such as ORF and others, can help bring some evidence and analytics about this needed convergence of challenges in the transition that we want to promote regarding the cooperation on the blue economy in the Indo-Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you. Ambassador Bhatia, I'd like to turn to you next and ask you, well, first is, of course, the fact that in the medieval era, India did not really play a part in the maritime domain, but its maritime influence is now growing. And of course, that's also counterbalanced by the fact that there was an ancient history of maritime power for India, which was lost. But how important is the blue economy for India to be a maritime power? We also have drafted a policy in place for the blue economy. What are your thoughts on that?
Thank you much. I think this is a thought-provoking question. I would say until about a decade back, the knowledge about blue economy and the awareness about its various facets was rather limited or modest in India. But in the last decade, gradually, the awareness has increased very sharply. And as I mentioned in my preliminary remarks, in the past 5 years, all the major players in this field, and I recall, I had come to ORF, met Mir Saran, and we had started together this common project under the aegis of FICCI, India's premier business chamber, which has produced a number of important publications. This all has led to a very good situation, and now Swati and many of us are also part of another project supported by CAS, the German foundation, which is about to come out with a major publication that would reflect the latest trends in the knowledge. So today I can say that both in the strategic and business sector and certainly on the government's part, the knowledge is very sharp and high. I think first important step India needs to take is to drop that word and declare an official policy on blue economy. Blue economy clearly has a whole set we need to do within the country, but also on the external side, a lot of work has to be done. So, design a blue economy policy externally and molding the tools of blue diplomacy are also priority. And that is where I come back to our French guest here. I think I would request at some stage, with your help, to ask him to spell out more on this concept of French maritime clusters. How is it working in France, and does he feel that it has a potential of practical kind of cooperation with India? Because we are theoretically all together in terms of bringing the stakeholders, but out in the field, in actual practice, are we there involving the various players in the coastal India? I still somewhat am doubtful, and therefore will be a good place to get some clarity at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's a very important question, Mr. Bernardac. Can you please field that?
Okay, thank you very much, Ambassador Bhatia, for your questions. And I would like to say that the what we call in French cluster maritime français, it relates pretty much to the first point you made in your introduction, to the need to reach out not only to the political sphere in the policy dialogue or in the social dialogue, but to reach out to business chamber, industries, and economic actors. So I think in the approach, it's pretty much aligned to what you envision and what you put forward into your introductory remark, is a way to have. It's also, it's a process of bringing stakeholders together about analyzing the sustainability of the economic activity, what is at stakes, and having a dialogue on how do you maintain the resource and manage the added value that you leverage on the resource. And so I think it's more than a technical initiative. It's really an initiative on inclusive governance, on the marine economy, and on sustainably manage the resource. And that's also echoes pretty much AFD strategy, right? Which is to improve the governance of marine and coastal areas resources, bringing together all the actors, not only the political level, which is important indeed, but communities and economic actors, and at every layers, I would say, of the value chain, and be them local fishermen communities, small fishing industries, and indeed the big players, each having a specific roles in understanding the added value of protecting the resource, and also, I would say, a governance mechanism to maybe bring more, I would say, convergence in the way the added value of the resource is shared, and to that's what we meant by fostering an inclusive prosperity in the region, in a nutshell. But we would be happy indeed to foster through AFD experience on this initiative with our dedicated experts and partners involved in France.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Swati, I'd like to ask you to go back to the blue economy policy that India has put in place. Do you think it does justice to the question of sustainable development? Or do you think it's tilted more towards investment, infrastructure, and security, as some say?
I think, for us, I won't say that it is tilted towards any particular sector per se. I think it's the right step forward, first of all. I think for us as a developing country, to actually take a call to actually focus on the economy, look at all the issues holistically, and put together a policy that is, trying to bring together everything, is quite essentially a big, itself a game changer. In the sense that, at a point of time when, everybody would keep saying that, many developing countries are not doing much, the fact that we are looking at a policy which is addressing all these issues itself tells you that we are ready to take a bold step. The fact that we have gone ahead and said by 2070 we will also be net zero itself tells you that it's a country that is going to take that step towards it, even though it's going to mean that we have to go through several challenges. And at a time when we do have our own socioeconomic and development challenges has still not been, taken care of or are still under progress. I think one needs to take that into context when also reading policy. But what really needs is a very strong institution, as well as strong implementation roadmap for the policy. That would probably really take care of pretty much a lot of these discussions on what's not being covered and what's going to be covered. But I think the policy right now itself is trying to bring in ministries together, agencies and departments together. That itself tells you that you're looking at it a big picture. And most of the times over the period of so many years of research, I've always heard people trying to say, you need to look at the macro issues, but now it is time to look at the big picture and look at the macro issues, rather than the micro issues. The reason being that everything is well connected and interconnected to each other. And unless you are able to look at interlinkages very carefully on, for example, if I am putting up solar to take out water somewhere, if you are not actually taking into your context the water index of a particular place, providing free energy to take out water doesn't really make much sense, because it's actually leading you to have a much bigger trouble in another sector, which is water. So I think until and unless you have a big picture in place, wherein you look at your security aspects and also your developmental issues and your environmental and biodiversity and inclusivity issues as well together in one format, it does not work well. I think that particular policy actually really does that. What we now need is an implementation map with step ones, priorities, as well as a small short-term, medium-term, and a long-term plan that tells us where we will be in the next 15 to 20 years in this policy and how this will work. And I think I just wanted to add is that the fact that because Mr. Bernardac did mention inclusivity, there is a lot of emphasis now to actually take in stakeholders, whether it's businesses, whether it is civil society, whether it's even coastal communities. I think there's a focus that they need to be part of your larger governance framework for you to really have a workable, and a strong model. And these kinds of governance framework are also essential for you to have a very viable business model. Because if you want to have good, sustainable businesses to be set up, a governance framework that takes stakeholders into picture, both not within India, even at the Indo-Pacific level. If you look at communities, all the communities are sharing the space. And I think they all need to come together, whether they are businesses, whether they are communities, whether they are governments, whether they are, provinces. Anybody who is at the coast and also beyond the coast, who is adding to the burden and the benefits of the coast, needs to be part of the larger discourse. And I think a policy which is much far-reaching allows you to do that. And I think from that perspective, it definitely provides you a lot of room to play with when you're trying to do an implementation. And I always look at, I have positive outlook to most things. So I see that it's a great time for all of us to put our heads together and try and see where are the points that we can really implement from a short to a long term, from a medium term fest. So yes, from my side, it's a game changer anyway, because I'm anyway excited about blue economy all the time. So
Right.
this at least the biggest step that we have.
Is it a draft game changer?
Yes, so even a draft game changer is a game changer for me, because until and unless our voices are being heard and people, civil society, research think tanks, so businesses are being asked, are we going in the right direction? The policy is being floated for comments. People are actually providing their comments. It itself shows how people have become a little bit more very aware of the situation where they are in this ocean space, and how they need to really be part of the governance itself. They need to really take part in whether it's a tier 1 or whether it's going to be a track 1.5 or a track 2 or a track 3 dialogue. But now there is a lot of awareness, as rightly, Ambassador Bhatia also said that there is an awareness that they need to be part of the governance to actually have changes that will help them and help the ocean at, from a holistic point of view. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Swati. Actually, a very quick follow-up question to that. Since we looked at the big picture, but if we were to look at the micro picture and look at some of the sectors that India could work with on the blue economy with other countries, what would those be?
I think one sector which has already been discussed by Ambassador Bhatia was fishing and aquaculture. That is definitely there. But I think I would also like to see if we can work in the science and technology space. That's really, when I say science and tech collaboration, it could be both in the traditional sector, whether it is fishing, or whether we are looking at, for instance, draft policy actually looks at setting up a lot of MSP, marine spatial planning aspects into our blue economy strategy. And if you're looking at marine spatial planning, is there a way that India and France could work in that area to really bring together a very good, tech collaboration that can really help us to achieve that particular policy point? The other aspect would be capacity building. I think when we are looking at even fishing or aquaculture, or you look at sustainable tourism, or you would look at shipping, and for us, obviously, shipbreaking is a major area of play. I think we can also look at forging ties in areas where we can reskill, upskill, and as well as look for new capacity building measures that will help us to actually, the right word that Mr. Bernardac used was added value, understanding the added value of a resource. So I think those kinds of programs that would provide us the understanding and to different types of stakeholders of what the resource from oceans are bringing in terms of added value and how it needs to be safeguarded. and the ecosystem itself needs to be safeguarded,
Thanks, Swati.
would become very important. Yeah.
Right.
Thanks.
Perhaps Mr. Bernardac can react to some of that. For now, I'd like to bring in Premesha. Premesha, you had talked about the role that regional organizations can play in promoting the blue economy, like the Indian Ocean Rim Association, which France joined last year, and also the Indian Ocean Commission, in which India has observer status. Perhaps if you could elaborate a bit more on that, and also how India and France can work with Southeast Asian countries to develop the blue economy.
Thanks, Sunaina. The reason I brought in regional organization is the fact that I know when we speak about regional organization, I think the foremost challenge which comes out is, which is both a challenge and also a good thing, is having so many countries in one place. It's sometimes difficult to get a consensus. That is the negativity, and that is why we are seeing so much of mushrooming of minilaterals, for example. But at the same time, it is also an advantage because you already have most of the stakeholders of the Indo-Pacific region in one place. So I think blue economy, since it's mostly related to the ocean space, and IORA being, it has not been a very successful organization, that needs to be highlighted, yes. But at the same time, it is a potential platform that we cannot negate, basically. So I think through IORA, there can be, for instance, working groups. As I mentioned, there can be working groups formed. There can be focus group discussions which takes place within the littorals. There can be IORA summits. For instance, when Indonesia was the chair from 2015 to 17, it did organize a leaders summit, but it also organized a blue economy summit, which not many people are aware of. So I think such summits can be formulated by the chairs, because it's a rotating chair basis. So whoever is the chair can organize a summit like this, where whatever issues which Swati raised, for example, Ambassador Bhatia raised, for example, about bringing in inclusivity, getting people from the coastal communities, fishery communities, civil societies, business parties, getting all these people in one place and having a focus group discussion on how the blue economy policy can be formulated. An Indian Ocean level blue economy policy can be formulated, for example, through the platform of the IORA. I think that would be a good step ahead. The second, I think, for instance, there is, for example, the ASEAN Maritime Forum, which has also not come up in a big way. But again, the Southeast Asian countries, for example, Cambodia, Philippines, face the real challenge of depletion of fishing resources, and also Indonesia. These three countries face overfishing to a very big extent. So I think bringing these countries, having these countries, and they are already in the ASEAN Maritime Forum. So bringing in countries like India, organization like EU, which now is a dialogue partner of ASEAN, discussing these kind of issues is also important. Now, when we are talking about Southeast Asia, another thing, everybody is aware of the South China Sea dispute, what kind of discussion it garners. One of the ways in which it was mentioned in one of the papers, I'm forgetting which organization did it, but they mentioned that, joint fishing practices, for example, in the disputed waters of the South China Sea can also help tackle a dispute in a big way. So everybody has been talking about, like you asked Ambassador Bhatia, for becoming a maritime power, does India need to also look at blue economy? Security is in itself not just related to the naval or the coast guard security. Security in itself now has evolved. It involves a lot of chambers within it, environmental, human, and also maritime disputes. For tackling maritime disputes, also sometimes blue economy solutions comes into play. So I think those kind of things. As I said, dumping of marine plastic debris. For that, also countries like Indonesia, countries like Malaysia has been very active in championing that. Again, that is a platform where Indonesia, Malaysia are again already members in the IORA. So India and France can, with these two countries, form a working group, form a summit within the banner of the IORA, and also, for example, the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, have discussions, have focus group discussions, have targeted discussions, and come up with, say, an Indian Ocean level in blue economic strategy, because this cannot be just approached in silos. A country alone can't come up with its blue economic strategy and expect that there will be sustainable use of resources. You have to make it an inclusive approach. For that, make it an Indian Ocean level approach or an Indo-Pacific level approach. And I think in that, the regional organizations can play a huge role.
Okay, thanks, Premesha. You actually have given me the lead into the question that I want to ask Ambassador Bhatia. This actually goes back to what you mentioned in your opening remarks, sir. The question about security versus development when it comes to the Indo-Pacific, and also the blue economy, and finding a balance between the two. I also read a column of yours recently where you pointed out the limitations of the European perspective on the Indo-Pacific. I think that was mostly when it comes to China. How does that impact cooperation? And what is the role of France, which has a clearly enunciated policy on the Indo-Pacific in steering the European Union's engagement?
Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate this question, but I really want to also involve, with your permission, Monsieur Bernardac, on this one. To answer your question directly, I think EU is undoubtedly one of the major players in blue economy, in the domain of blue economy. They may not be still a major player in the Indo-Pacific as such, because there are other countries which are militarily more powerful, more active. But European Union and Europe as such has had a rich and long and vibrant connect with the Indo-Pacific. And I think so far they have given the signs of inclination to play the role on the economic side, technological side. And this latest EU policy, in which France has taken a major role in shaping it, is very relevant for India. It's very important for India. And of course, I not highlight as to how important strategically the relationship, bilateral relationship between India and France is. So this discussion that we are undertaking now has all those very favorable parameters here. The point where I want to go in is to say that I also appreciate the enthusiasm of Premesha for multilateral and regional organizations. Undoubtedly, they have their value, but they have also their limitations. And therefore, we need to adopt, in collaboration and consultation with France, a dual approach. First, it has to be on bilateral side. Paris and Delhi need to agree that when it comes to blue economy, we would hold our own bilateral track, not merely of dialogue, but actually a strategy to develop practical collaboration. And may I take this opportunity, because this is a global reach event, I take this opportunity to call on the French business and industry and Indian business industry to perhaps use the channels of AFD, FICI, whichever other platform is available, for holding a direct, focused dialogue on blue economy and develop a common program. I won't say minimum program. I would say a common program that really delivers results, is specifically focused on coastal India. And the second aspect undoubtedly would be for India and France to work strategically together in the Indian Ocean Rim Association. France has now full membership, as Premesha earlier mentioned, but it has had very long association with the IORA also, and India is not at all unfamiliar with it. So the two tracks can run together. They will reinforce each other. And the moment the French knowledge, technology, financing, and other best practices show some positive results, coastal India's pursuit of blue economy, it will have a massive impact in the rest of the Indo-Pacific and the IORA area. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, you did. And you've also asked a few questions that I'd like to direct towards Mr. Bernardac. I think you're on mute.
Okay, excuse me. Excuse me, did you ask a specific question or you want me to react on what was just said?
To react to what he said, also the role of regional organizations.
Sure.
Swati had raised the point about scientific and research cooperation.
Yeah,
So
sure.
to take on some of those points.
Sure. No, and on the bilateral tract, well noted, and indeed the interest of France and AFD to strengthen the ties and demonstrate what does it mean to, I would say, ensure a sustainable blue economy and along the Indian space, of the Indo-Pacific region, and also to foster ties in applied research and why not co-financing. And this last point on the bilateral and which is quite key in my view as well is the collaboration between both private sectors. On the institution, and coming back to Ambassador Bhatia and previous points made by Mrs. Ganeshan as well, is on the regional institution and I would say capacity building. France and AFD is collaborating with IRA, and we have a technical cooperation, for instance, on marine resources management, sustainable yield approach, and so forth, which is meant to raise capacity in those aspects. In other sub-region, we collaborate in disaster management skills as well, and with a specific views on environmental disaster management, building on French experience in the region, for instance, in the Indian Ocean. And further issues of cooperation could entail, for instance, ports connectivity and port sustainability, meaning I would say the environmental management of the port, and regarding, for instance, local pollution derived by ports. And in the end, in overall, I would say that a better management of a common resource, and as was said, to assess how it can lead to an inclusive prosperity. For us, it's really an issue of research, applied research, and knowledge. It's really an issue of governance that we can promote from both sides, India and France, in a way of how do you govern and this common, which is around the blue economic cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. And in a sentence, if I can summarize it like this, is to avoid the tragedy of the common and raise the opportunity of the commons. And this is where, when I say to avoid the tragedy of the common, this is where really the 3D approach converge, to avoid conflict around the resource, to raise up security for all the parties in the Indo-Pacific region, and to ensure prosperity. And that's where I would say the development component that we can contribute to as far as AFD is concerned is really complementary, and I would say can leverage on the diplomacy and security perspective of France and India cooperation in the Indo-Pacific through the blue economy. Thank you.
That's actually the note to finish this on summarizing everything that we discussed today is for us. The blue economy is a topic that we know will gain more and more resonance, and we will be returning with new perspectives on it. And we hope to hear from you again. Thank you very much to each of our speakers today, Mr. Bernardac, Ambassador Bhatia, Swati, and Premesha. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you for this.